Oh God. Well, I suppose it depends on who you're talking to, doesn't it?
Mm.
Um, I actually don't have a job title. I think because I run a small 1-2 man business depending on the job. So a lot of the time it's just me wearing various hats. Um, whether it's dealing with clients or sitting doing design work or whatever. So, if somebody was to say to me on the street, what do you do for a living? I'd say, I'm a designer.
Mm.
And then often they'll say, oh, what do you design? And that's where it becomes difficult because then you go, I do web stuff. At which point they think they're like their 13-year-old nephew or something.
Yeah.
So this is kind of almost like an apologetic thing with web designers. You go, I'm a web designer, but that's what I do. So yeah, that's where everything that I do is based around design. So I would say that I'm a designer, but I've always wanted a business card, a little bit like. Do you remember Danny Ocean in Ocean's 11, where he gives the guy his business card and it's just got Danny Ocean written on it?
All right,
And
nothing
that's
else.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing else. I've always wanted a business card that just had, Andy
And
Clarke.
just expect everybody to just know who you are.
Exactly. So yeah, I suppose designer, but because I work on my own, I, I can't really be anything else. I can't be a senior designer or a creative director or anything like that. So I'm very much a kind of take me as you find me kind of guy. So I suppose designer will do.
Okay. And your business is Stuff and Nonsense?
Stuff and nonsense. Yeah, this is October this year, which is bloody hell next month, will be our 11th year.
11 years. Wow.
11 years of working on my own, and I've not been found out yet. I keep waiting. I don't know whether it's like with a lot of freelancers, but sometimes you think it's going to stop.
Mm.
You think that somehow the work's going to dry up, and I've been very lucky because in 11 years it hasn't dried up. But yeah, I keep waiting to be found out.
Okay, so what's an average week like for you?
Oh God, unless I'm travelling, because I've been very, very lucky and I get to travel quite a bit and I get to do conferences and workshops and that kind of thing. So unless I'm travelling, I tend to be here with my toys. So I've kind of had a bit of a policy over the last year or two where I won't work on more than one project at one time.
Okay.
I'm not very, very good at multitasking at all. So I find it very difficult to flip from one thing to the next. So we've been quite conscious about booking things in that have been like, one job at one time.
Okay.
So generally speaking, I'm here with my toys, working on projects. People sometimes think it must be kind of like, very glamorous kind of lifestyle if you get kind of known for speaking at conferences or something. But actually, most of the time, I'm in these four walls. So, and it's sunny today. You've caught it on a good day.
You can just see it coming through the window
often,
there behind you.
Yeah, but often living in Wales, it's bloody miserable. So, yeah, I tend to be here.
Okay. So you run lots of workshops, like you said. You do them all over the place, don't you?
Yeah, we're starting to get a lot busier on that kind of thing. I really enjoy finding out about stuff. I think one of the problems with client work, although I enjoy the different kind of challenges, is that often because of deadlines or other factors, you find yourself pretty much on a treadmill. And one of the things I really, really like is sitting down and learning, particularly to do with CSS. And particularly now when browsers are really starting to get exciting. And I like to spend time learning new CSS stuff, but finding ways that you can kind of practically apply those new properties to, practical stuff. Not a lot of demos out there, with lots of new WebKit toys, but actually finding real practical applications for them. I love doing that kind of thing. And then kind of spending time translating that into content. So whether that's articles or stuff for a book that I'm going to write again next year, or workshops. So we started to do our own series of workshops. We did a pilot last year for a Beautiful Web workshop last year down in London. And the original plan was to do like half a dozen in 2009, but with client work and, other factors, we didn't end up doing as many. But I did a bunch in Australia earlier on in the year, and we've got 2 coming up. We've got one in Birmingham next week and one in Newcastle the month after.
Right.
And then I'm doing one as part of Web Directions East in Tokyo.
Right.
So they're really fun, actually. It's actually a really nice way to earn a living, because I enjoy that kind of interactive side of it with people anyway. And I can very much see that I'm going to kind of split roles over the next year or 2. And I really want to shift the balance between it being kind of like, 90% client work and 10% content, to switching it to being, much more kind of 60-40 maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. Well, let's rewind a little bit. Let's go back to the beginning of the start of your career, and take me all the way back. What was your very first job?
Oh God, here we go. Right, so yeah, before I left school, my mum used to do the books in a plastics factory in Corby in the Midlands,
Right.
and I used to go there from kind of, I don't know, I suppose I'd be 15 onwards in the summers, and I would work in this plastics factory. So I would do everything from making what they call traps, which are the tubes that go under sinks, the kind of piping, U-bend type things. Used to make those. I made video boxes, like VCR boxes. They used to make those there. Worked on those machines. And I made My Little Ponies as well. So it was all this kind of injection molding thing. So yeah, I suppose, my first job was really making My Little Ponies.
You should get a T-shirt with that on.
Yeah, I know. So that was fun. And I did the usual kind of student thing. I worked in Sainsbury's for years, pushing trolleys around. And Sainsbury's taught me a lot. It taught me how to skive. Because I was one of those students that was there for years. I used to always go back in the summers and stuff, so I would end up being quite sort of senior.
Right.
And I learnt the art of delegating there. So generally, at one point, I actually worked on the beers, wines, and spirits department, which was fantastic because you just stood and did absolutely bugger all for the whole day.
Yeah.
So I did that. I worked in Sainsbury's, and then went off to art school and worked in bars and clubs and pubs in Nottingham for a bit. Got fired from one nightclub, which is the only time in my entire life I've ever been fired from something.
Can you tell us why you were fired or not?
Yeah, actually, because I'd worked in pubs behind the bar for years, and I knew every bloody scam going, but I was always honest. And I was working in this one particular club in Nottingham, and the till was down money-wise night after night. It was always under what it should be. And, there was this suspicion, I suppose, that, I was having my hands in the till. Which I wasn't, actually. And as I said to the manager at the time, if I'd have been on the take, you wouldn't know about it. Because I knew every trick in the book.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the only time I ever got fired. Which was great, actually. That was a real bonus, because I ended up, the week after that, I ended up getting a job in a comic shop, which I was there for a couple of years, and my friend Pete and I, we ran this comic shop in Nottingham for a couple of years, and that was fantastic.
I've gathered from some talks I've seen you do about comics that you'd probably love that. And
Yeah,
I can see
no,
Watchmen in behind you. Yeah.
you can see my Watchmen collection up there. Yeah. So I did that up until I had to get a proper job, and then I'd gone to art school thinking that I was going to be a fantastic painter, and I wasn't. I was terrible, and I got very much into photography during the time. So when I left art school, I thought that I would go to London and be an assistant in a photo studio.
Mm.
So actually, I went down to London. That was my first paying job, first proper job. Was actually working as an assistant in a big car studio.
Right.
And this was in the days before electronic retouching. So a lot of the effects that you would now see done with Photoshop were all done what they call in camera, with multiple takes on the same sheet of film, multiple exposures.
Right.
So I worked on some amazing things in this photo studio, stuff that you just wouldn't believe now. We did an ad. We shot an ad for a Fiat at one point where the Fiat was supposed to be on the top of a mountain, and what it was actually put up onto a mini scaffold tower, and surrounded by polystyrene blocks that were carved to look like rock. And then there was a sky behind it that one guy had painted, and it had taken him 2 weeks to paint the sky on the wall. It was only there for 2 or 3 days.
Mm.
And then all of the cloud and the mist around the car, around this mountain, was actually about 20 people with shopping trolleys. And what they did was they made clouds out of chicken wire and covered it with covered the chicken wire with cotton wool. And then everybody got down low, and they moved these shopping trolleys side to side for like a 2 or 3 minute exposure to create all of this mist.
All right.
Everything was done in camera. This was This was like probably about 89, 90.
Proper photography then.
Proper 10:8 large format photography. Yeah, none of this kind of digital nonsense.
It's all cheating nowadays, isn't it?
Mm. But yeah, it's amazing to think that, even back then you had photographers like Jeff Senior, who I remember very well, that would be, they'd be £5,000 a day photographers. And that didn't include the studio hire or the film and processing or the scene builders or painters or whatever. So the money that used to get spent back then on that kind of stuff was incredible.
It's the unfortunate thing, isn't it? As things get easier to do, people's prices have to come down to compete with everybody else.
I just think it's the way that, that particular industry changed a lot. And obviously, later on after that, I was involved in digital photography because I went to work for a camera manufacturer. They made large format 10:8, 5:4 plate cameras, company based in Switzerland, and they started to get involved in the whole digital photography game. And I was actually I actually shot one of the first digital photos ever in the UK. And I installed the first digital camera that ever came into the UK, which went into a studio up in Glasgow.
How big were it? Quite big.
Well, yeah. The actual camera itself was a camera body. It was called Leaf Digital Camera Back, and it was about the size and shape of a house brick, and it weighed about as much. It had great big fins on the back, and it clipped onto the back of a Hasselblad camera. But the funny thing was about the Leaf, the early digital cameras, was that they couldn't shoot moving subjects in colour.
Right.
Because, like all CCD chips, all black and white. So the way that it used to take a colour picture was to take 3 exposures through a red, a green, and a blue filter that rotated around the lens, and then it would assemble the 3 pictures in the computer.
Right.
And that was the Leaf DCB. This was like probably early mid-90s. And this thing cost about 40,000 just for the back.
Mm.
So at one point, I'd sold and installed more digital cameras than anybody else in the world at one point. So I was into that whole kind of digital arena. I'd gone away from art stuff and design stuff completely.
Okay. So how did you end up coming back into it then?
Well, it was weird. I went to work for a studio down in South London, in Kent actually. And I'd actually sold and set up this digital studio, digital colour repro for this agency. And Harry, the guy that ran it, said, "Why don't you come and work for me? And we'll set up the studio." So I did that for about 18 months, I suppose. And that was a really good education again in terms of getting back into creative stuff, because I was doing everything from newspaper ads to a whole kind of variety of print stuff, and it really got me back in, got my creative interest back up again. Mm-hmm. And at the time, the web was just starting. It was like 96, and clients were starting to kind of ask about the web. And so we started dabbling very early, I think, in web stuff. And Harry actually started to produce some of the company's first websites using Visual Studio, all these kind of drag and drop things, and did the first website for the company. And then I was watching him do it, thinking, that's terrible. But I really wanted to learn how, to do it. So I kind of made it my hobby at the time to learn about how web pages work and putting web pages together and that kind of thing. So, but of course it was all front page. There was nothing else at the time. It was all just using front page 98.
I remember front page 98.
Yeah. So that really started off the whole kind of interest in the web thing at the time. Was really just sitting there figuring out how stuff worked.
But you ended up moving to Wales, and you've been running your own business for 11 years, so that were 13 years ago. There was a move?
Yeah, more or less.
Sometime?
Yeah, there was. I mean, basically, we were living in Suffolk, and I was driving down into Kent every day over the Dartford Bridge. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't working out with this particular job. I wasn't particularly happy down there. And around about that time, my son, who's now 17 and looking at universities, he was just a little lad, and he actually got pneumonia. He was really, really poorly, and spent several months in hospital. And during that time, it kind of a bit of a wake-up call, really. I just realised that there was more to life than going into work every day. So we came up to Wales, up to North Wales, just for a couple of weeks holiday at one point, and my wife's brother lives here. And somebody happened to say, you should come and live up here. So we got back home and thought, well, that's possibly a good idea. Sold the house and moved within the space of a month.
Yeah. Wow.
And we came up here, found this place, and I'd kind of imagined that I would just go and work for an agency. I'd go back and do advertising. And as it happened, a few people started to say, what about this internet thing? Can you do anything with that? And I suppose I was a little kind of underqualified, but I still said yes. And 11 years later, they still ask, and I'm still underqualified.
Okay, so how did you get into all the speaking? And are you still involved with the W3C as well?
Well, I mean, there's two different things there. One was the whole speaking thing. It's funny. I always refer to it as like the class of 95. Not 95, 2005. Because there was a bunch of people over here that were blogging at that time. Andy Budd, Jeremy Keith, John Hicks, Ian Lloyd, Colley, a whole bunch of people that were writing on blogs when, everybody wrote on blogs. And that was great. And then So I set my blog up in, I think it was late 2003, early 2004, something like that. So I was a little bit late to the party. And it was in 2005 that Patrick Griffiths was doing the first App Media conference down in London. And he didn't know, I think, how well it was going to go. So he was kind of, keeping costs down. So he said to a bunch of us that had never spoken before, me, Andy Budd, and various others, will you speak at this event? And we weren't paid. And Jeff Zeldman was there. That was the first time I met him. And Doug Bowman was there. So we did the first App Media conference, and I'd never done any public speaking before then at all. I'd just, I'd never spoken to like a room of more than kind of, half a dozen people.
Right.
But it kind of came quite naturally, and people enjoyed it. And from then, the invitations kind of kept coming. So that's been really good. I mean, it's been one of the nicest parts about my job for like the last 5 years, I suppose, is getting out and travelling and going to conferences and, meeting people that come along. And that's been one of the nicest things.
Okay.
And then the whole W3C thing, I actually went down to one of the W3C, the CSS working group kind of face-to-face meetings a few years ago, and was showing them. They let me sit in on the meeting. They don't normally have kind of outsiders, but they let me sit in on this meeting. And I was showing Bert Boss and Halcombe Lee some of the stuff I was working on, and they then said, well, why don't you come on board as an invited expert?
Right.
So I said yes. And it was really nice to be asked, but to be honest, it wasn't good for me, and it certainly wasn't good for them. So I don't do that anymore.
Okay. So looking back at your career so far, do you have like a defining moment? Do you have a particular thing that you're particularly proud of?
Well, I think in terms of the defining moment, I think it's actually got to come. There's two really, I think. One in terms of the sort of the speaking side, the teaching and speaking side of what I do, which has to be that first App Media talk. These things are related, I've just realised. Because at that first App Media talk, I talked about the redesign of an online store that I'd done for Disney.
Right.
And so that was what this whole this talk was about at the time. And then I suppose the related moment was actually not designing for Disney, but I don't know whether you remember the story, but this is going back to like 2006 now, early 2006.
Okay.
I designed this online store for Disney UK, and it was one of the first really accessible standards-based e-commerce sites built using this software, but all of the templates and everything was we'd concentrated a lot on accessibility. It was all CSS, and it got a lot of press.
Mm-hmm.
It was on the Web Standards Project. It went into Jeffrey's Designing with Web Standards book, and it was a nice piece of work. And then Disney changed agencies and scrapped the website that I designed and went with something else that the agency had made in .NET.
Right.
That was, completely inaccessible, table-based layout, really terrible .NET Microsoft shite markup.
Right.
And so they'd replace something really good with something that was really, really rank.
Right.
And the press that I got from losing that client put a huge amount of focus on. It was actually one of the best things that ever happened to me was not working for Disney anymore.
Right. Okay.
Because it put a lot of focus on how good the first site had been, and again that got quite a lot of press. So I think those were the two main moments when things changed.
Okay. So, equally so, do you have any regrets?
Oh God, loads.
Anything
Yeah,
particular that you do differently?
Yeah. I had an opportunity. This is going back 2004, where I actually set up another business developing e-commerce software, and it didn't work out. We had a bunch of people that we took on, and it taught me a lot during that during that whole process. It was a terrible experience, and it was a miserable experience, and I was very, very pleased to get over it. But one of the things that I realized along the way, one of the regrets that I had, is that I didn't manage to build the business in the way that I imagine a great business should be built. And I had the opportunity, and for various reasons, it didn't happen. Which is why I look at what Simon Collison's done with Erskine Design and how he's built that business up. And, I mean, not only is he, one of my best friends, but, I have such admiration for the way that he has built this team of people that are, real personalities and real talents in their own right. But he's managed to bring them all together inside. If you ever go there, it's like a wonderful atmosphere. I mean, I go there once a month just because it kind of like it recharges my batteries. So yeah, that would be one of my major regrets. I could have built a business that I think could have been exceptional, and I didn't.
Right.
And I wish that I could have made it work, but for all sorts of reasons it didn't.
Okay. So now I'm going to ask your advice for anybody out there. Without question, you've had a very successful career and everything. For anybody out there who's wanting to follow a similar career path to what you've done, what's the best bit of advice you could give them?
That's a really difficult question.
Everyone says that's a really difficult question. I might have to start refining it.
I suppose the one piece of advice that I would... Well, there's two, actually. And they are kind of related, but they're opposite sides of the coin, I suppose. One of the things that I think is incredibly important is to stay enthusiastic and passionate about the particular thing that you do. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's weird now, but, I've been working with CSS for, I suppose it's coming up to like 8 years or something. And whereas a lot of people have, gone off and talked about something else, or they've become enthusiastic about something else, I haven't learnt JavaScript or PHP or anything like that. CSS is still my thing, and I still find it really fascinating. And that's one of the things that I love to do most of all, is to sit and write markup and then use CSS. I love that. I'm really still passionate about that. So finding something that you can be really passionate about and working on it, being quite specific rather than being kind of general, I think is really important. But at the same time, one of the things that I've learned is that, particularly when you work on your own, like I do mostly, and you're in a place like this, which is I work from home. I've got a little place attached to my house. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you've got to be careful of is keeping that kind of work-life balance. And it's very, very tempting to be consumed by the thing that you're passionate about, and to forget that there's a life outside the web and Twitter and everything else. And I don't do it. I'm really bad at it. I cannot remember the last time that I mowed the lawn. It's years. It's probably over a decade since I last mowed the lawn.
I'd pay someone to mow my lawn. I really hate doing it.
Yeah. I cannot remember the last time that I cleaned a car that wasn't when it came back from being, got clean when it came back from being serviced or something. I'm really bad at that. If there's two things to do on a job list, one of which is to sort out my personal finances or to do something personally related, and the other thing is to play with a bit of WebKit CSS, I'm going to go for the CSS every time. So actually keeping that work-life balance is, for me, it's really difficult. So I think those would be the two pieces of advice: is really stay really passionate about it, but at the same time kind of temper it.
Okay. So I suppose to wrap up, where do you see yourself in the future?
Where do I see myself in the future? How can I answer that without thinking of Taylor Swift? No. It used to be Kylie, but I've gone off Kylie now. I honestly don't know. If you'd have said to me 10 years ago, where do you see yourself being? I wouldn't have been able to answer it. And if you'd have asked me that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to answer it either. So I'm damn well not going to be able to answer it now. I think that life will change a little for me over the next couple of years. I mean, whereas a lot of my friends, Ryan Carson and Mark Bolton, Doug Bowman, a lot of my friends are having kids now. They've got babies or very young children. Alex is going to be off to university next year, and I did it early because I'm only 32. So one of the things that I think I like about what I might do is just the ability to keep traveling, because generally speaking, I can do what I need to do from anywhere. So I'd like to think that I can go and spend 3 months in America and 3 months in Australia and 3 months in the south of France or whatever. And actually, probably from this point on, I think, lead a little bit more of a nomadic kind of life a bit with the travelling. And for that, I think it's going to be a lot less client work related and a lot more content related.
Right.
So, workshops, book writing, articles, that kind of thing. I think that's... You can hear that, can't you?
It's okay. Sound effects are fine.
Sound effects are fine. So I think that's generally it, really. I think over the next few years, things are going to change a little bit.
Okay.
But you know what this game's like? It's just impossible to predict.
Absolutely.
And I'm not a businessman. I don't have a strategic plan for, in 2 years' time, I'm going to have a studio with, 5 or 6 staff and, whatever. Been there, done that, don't want to do that again.
Right.
I don't know. You just have to take life as it comes.
Just keep an eye on you and see what you're doing in 10 years' time or something.
Yeah, I honestly don't know where we'll be. But, we've been very lucky over the last 10 years, so I hope we'll stay lucky, touch wood, over the next 10 years as well.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Andy, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me, and I'm sure people will find your career very interesting.
Well, I'm glad that it's been a really nice to talk to a proper northerner.
Proper northerner. Oh, yes. I'll try my best.
Yes. None of this soft southern boag world nonsense.
He'll love that you said that.